Mr. Braxton Wallis
Yeah.
from small town Mississippi. How did that environment and growing up there shape who you are now?
There was definitely a time in my life where I wouldn't want to admit how much of an effect it had on me. Um, but as being a mature adult now, I can I can kind of more objectively say that it's honestly shaped everything. It's affected everything for me to be the way that I am now and who I am today. Um, I don't think I quite realized it wasn't until really that when I moved to Chicago that I realized just how different my upbringing was compared to everyone else, and just how different life is down there. How the perspectives are different, values are different, the way of life is different. Just it truly is a completely different culture than what I came to see up here in Chicago. So it really, affected everything.
In what ways is it different?
Oh man, I mean, one was like pace of life. Pace of life is so different. I distinctly remember I think it was my first week here in Chicago, there was someone I really wanted to get connected to. And I remember asking them out to coffee. I was like, hey, like, I would love to go grab a coffee. Let me buy you a coffee. Would love to just like get connected with you. I'm new to the area, that sort of thing. And I remember asking them that and then them responding with, oh, I would love to. Let me check my calendar and I'll get back to you. And that statement, I just remember being so absolutely confused because, that's something that you hear like in movies. You're like watching a movie and they're like, get their secretary to check their calendar and stuff. I was like, what do you mean you have a calendar? What? It was just completely foreign to me that people were that busy and people had that much planned out in advance. In Mississippi, like uh, a famous line that a lot of people say, if you ask them like, oh, what are you doing next week? They're like, I don't even know what I'm eating for lunch today. Just completely different pace of life. Um, Outside of that, the people themselves are different in a lot of ways. I think, I'm not trying to make any sort of political statement or, anything like that. I don't want to be derogatory towards anyone, but definitely something that's been very apparent to me is people in Mississippi have seen what real poverty looks like. They've seen what real absence of privilege looks like in life. Um, I went to school with kids who grew up in the woods in a single wide trailer with no running water and no electricity. I went to school with kids who, they got one pair of shoes for the entire year and it didn't matter if their toes were hanging out the front because the soles are busted. The kids who, couldn't afford the already reduced $1.50 lunch that you had to pay for every day. Um, I mean, again, I didn't really have the best childhood, but comparatively, I grew up around and saw real poverty, you know, and I think growing up around that, so not speaking just about myself, but the people of Mississippi as well, it definitely inserts this kind of just innate sense of perspective in life that I personally believe that a lot of people up here are missing. And I'm not saying that like that's their fault. Again, we're all products of our environment. Um, but I definitely think that that kind of experience just kind of informs how you go about life and how you live your life, talk to others, etc.
So, growing up in that type of environment, I assume that the norm is to kind of have a ceiling on your beliefs and you're limiting yourself. But obviously you left and are doing something that's rare for people that come from there. So at what point did that like mindset shift for you? Was there a moment or did you always want to get out or
Um, you know, you say rare, And I that's the argument that a lot of people down there would use. It's like, oh, it's few and far in between, like the people who get out, like they're the exception. But then at the same time, when we're in school in third, fourth, fifth grade, and you gotta write a paper, do a project on someone famous from Mississippi, there's tons of people who have made big impacts in the world who are from Mississippi. We're one of the largest producers of professional athletes, but outside of professional athletes, there's plenty of big, well-known people who came from Mississippi. I would look at those examples growing up, and I would see all these people. I'm like, why can't I also do that? Elvis Presley's from Mississippi. Rick Ross is from Mississippi. It's kind of crazy to put Elvis Presley and Rick Ross in the same sentence. No disrespect. But, the famous Motown band, The Temptations, their lead singer, David Ruffin, he's from Mississippi. Oprah Winfrey from Mississippi. And the list goes on and on and on and on. There's plenty of big people who made big impacts from Mississippi. A person that I clung to in particular was a guy by the name of Robert Pittman. I believe that's his name. I believe it's Robert Pittman, yeah. He went to my high school, actually, and he ended up becoming one of the co-founders of MTV, and then went on to found iHeartRadio. And if I believe he's still the current standing CEO of iHeartRadio as well. And he went to my high school. And I just clung to him. I wrote multiple papers about him in high school. And I just remember thinking to myself, I want to go do the things that those people are doing. I don't understand why everyone's telling me I can't go do those things. Because, again, there's very much a glass ceiling in Mississippi of, no one gets out. We're blue collar people. We go do blue collar work. Anyone that you're glorifying right now is just the exception to the rule. They're not the commonality. All these things. And so it honestly, it was pretty difficult, just having to fight anyone and everyone, because it almost felt like no one was actually saying that from like a genuine perspective. It was almost as if it was like their knee-jerk reaction to be like, oh, no, you can't go do that. Oh, no, you can't leave. Oh, no, like that won't happen. Like that can't happen. Like you can't go do that. And I think also probably another part of that is the fact that Mississippi is such a poor state. And because it's such a poor state overall, even if you grew up like fairly well off, like you still comparatively to the rest of the country are very low to low middle class, and so there's a little bit of a like kind of a scarcity mindset, and there's kind of a play it safe mindset in Mississippi, just because there's not a lot to go around, and because of that, you're kind of told to just be grateful for what you have and stay like that, and then also don't squander it because it might be the only thing you ever have. So I think kind of all those things just kind of inform how people treat leaving, trying to do something entrepreneurial or something different, But yeah, definitely. I mean, it would be very naive to say that there's not a glass ceiling in Mississippi.
Did you have a support system that was backing you in your beliefs and goals?
Yes and no. I mean, I came from very creative parents, and I came from people who definitely had the talent to go out and do really cool things. My biological father being an actor, he did the theater circuit and got to do some pretty cool things. My mom is one of the most incredible painters I've ever seen. I've never seen someone be able to switch. I'm not a painter, so I might not be using the right words here, but kind of formats of painting, like oil painting, acrylic, whatever the case may be. She can just switch between the two without missing a beat. Growing up, we didn't have a ton of money. And so my mom would go to the store and buy a painting she really liked. And she would then go buy the canvas and materials necessary to recreate it. And then she'd bring it home, recreate it almost perfectly to the point that you legitimately couldn't tell the difference. and go take the original painting back. Just incredible. So I had great examples of what it meant to have a skill or a talent and be good at something, if that makes sense. Like I had a visual example of what it meant to be good at something. But at the same time, my parents were kind of victim to the same kind of just like glass ceiling mentality that comes with being, in Mississippi, of play it safe, you know, go to school, get a good job, work hard, that sort of thing. It definitely didn't help also that growing up I was just like objectively good at academics. I always did really, really, really well in school. And I think part of that, particularly my mom, was pretty resistant to what I wanted to do in life. And I think part of that was that she saw such just a clear vision of me, finishing out school, valedictorian, going to some good college, becoming a doctor or a pharmacist or, something along those lines, um, because kind of that something that kind of coincides with that glass mentality mindset is that they also just don't see any other way out besides going the academic route. They don't see any other route outside of either going and getting a blue collar job and working really hard, or going and getting what they would call a good job and being an accountant or a pharmacist or a whatever. So visually, I had great examples of what it meant to be good at something and to want to be good at something and to chase something. But also at the same time, my parents were pretty resistant to what I wanted to do. It wasn't until later in life, I would say me going into my freshman year of college, that my mom kind of gave up almost in a way. And she was like, okay, you're going to do whatever you want to do anyways. Like, there's no point in me, you know, harping on you all the time, and she kind of just backed off and kind of let me do me.
So, how do you find the confidence in yourself to still go after what you want when you come from that type of situation?
Um, I mean, we could do a whole episode on confidence. I personally, I do think I'm a little bit of, I'm probably not the best example for this. I just, by the grace of God, have always kind of had confidence. It was just something I was kind of born with to a degree. I was never someone who had like weird negative self-talk or, looked down upon myself. Something that probably really informed who I am today and kind of my confidence level was I spent a lot of time with my grandfather growing up. And my grandfather was someone who for anyone who has a veteran grandfather, you can kind of imagine who he was. He was a Vietnam vet, very meticulous with his work. He went on after the military to go on and do a few different interesting things with work, and was just a very just militant is probably like the best way to put it. Just very sharp, very detail oriented, and was just very intentional and diligent with how he lived his life and the things that he did. And one of the things that he instilled in me growing up was to I don't want to say like expect greatness, like that sounds like a LeBron quote. But he definitely instilled the mindset of you work really hard and you expect good things to come from the hard work you put in. You know, so it's just kind of a mindset that's kind of always informed how I move and how I go about things. So anytime I've ever pursued anything in life, I trusted my work ethic and I almost assumed that the outcome would be good, you know, in in a way. I just always assumed that things would go well because I trusted my work ethic. And then, once those things happened, they were expected. And that kind of allows you to kind of be this kind of even keel person. You don't get too low, you don't really get too high. You trust your work ethic, do the work, you expect it to be good, turns out to be good, you expected it to be good, and you move on. I was never the kid that really celebrated. A lot of people talk about like celebrating wins and, celebrating the victories in life and all that sort of thing. And, maybe there's an argument that it's probably not the healthiest thing to abstain from, but it's just kind of part of how I was raised of, you know, the good things happen. Those happen because you knew that they would happen, you know? Um, so all that to say is that I guess that kind of just relates to confidence in a way that, it's just expected. But overall, you build it from the ground up through the reps. At the end of the day, confidence is just trust in yourself specifically. If I ask you to come pick me up every day at 3 p.m. for the next week, and on day 5, you haven't missed a single pickup, that means that for day 6, I can trust that you're going to come pick me up at 3 p.m., right? Because through the reps, you have displayed that you can do the thing over and over and over again. Confidence is the same thing. It's just in yourself. People who lack confidence, it means that in the past, they've asked of themselves something and they didn't deliver. Classic example is diet. You want to lose weight. You ask of yourself, okay, we're going to start this diet and we're going to stick to it and we're going to lose this weight. And then 3 weeks in, you crash out, don't follow through. And then that leads to confidence issues with you losing weight and whatever the case may be. You don't have confidence because you didn't show up for yourself when you asked yourself to show up. So again, hard work ethic, doing the reps. You prove to yourself over and over again that you're capable of doing the thing that you're asking yourself to do. I was just fortunate enough to have someone in my life early that kind of instilled that into me early. So confidence was just like never really an issue. It was never really a question to me. If I wanted something, trusted my work ethic, and I would go get it.
So we talked a lot about where you're from and the people around you and how that impacted you, but I want to peel the layers back a little bit on you as an individual growing up, because I know your story personally, and like you weren't necessarily on a great track the whole time. So first I want to hear about that, and then where was that moment where there was a shift?
Again, just from an early age, I just kind of wanted to do something more from than like what the people I saw around me were doing. That sounds kind of woo-woo, but at minimal, I wanted to just like do something different. I wanted to go and do, I think a lot of it was also kind of informed as to what I was kind of consuming at the time in terms of content and what I was really paying attention to in culture. I was really big into skateboarding growing up. So skateboarding culture in particular really informed a lot of that. I remember Diamond Supply Co. being a huge kind of thing in my life where I was like, this is so cool. Like, this is something that I would like to do, and following Nicky Diamond was, like the founder of Diamond Supply Co. and hearing his story. And, he was really the first kind of like entrepreneur that I looked up to. It was like what he just did was just so cool to me. And I was like, I want to do something like this. Like, this is so interesting. And then around that time, Gary Vee was starting to kind of get traction, and kind of looking back, it's crazy to see just how ahead of his time Gary Vee was. The whole personal brand and making social content and making these videos on his social media and just like all of these things. He was doing that 5-7 years before anyone else was. And so I was consuming a lot of his content. I was reading his books, and just like the way he was talking about entrepreneurship and chasing what you think will actually give you fulfillment in life and all of that stuff just like hit me from a pretty early age. It also kind of came from a place of I wanted to be able to give my family a different life. I don't ever want to try to over dramatize how I grew up because, again, as I said earlier, I grew up around kids who I would consider were unprivileged. They grew in some pretty rough conditions. So I don't want to over dramatize my childhood. Um, but we definitely didn't have it easy either. I was essentially born to a single mom. She worked 3 jobs, and things were tough for a while. She eventually married my quote unquote stepdad, who I basically call my dad. Or not even basically, I call him my dad, and he's the person I call dad to this day. But even after they got married, things kind of started to even out. But then, 2008 happened, and, everyone knows what happened in 2008. And then it's very hard to recover from something like that. And, I think my parents did a pretty decent job of trying to hide it and not make things seem as bad as they were. But looking back at it, you know, things weren't great. There were definitely times in life where I really wish that I could have helped my parents in some way. My mom is just like this crazy hardworking person. I was just talking to my mom the other day actually, and just like out of curiosity, I asked her how long did it take her to go back to work after she had me? Because a few friends in our lives had children, and I was just like curious. Just I'm just ignorant to that whole process, and she said that she was back to work in like 2.5 weeks after she had me, and she was like, yeah, like I didn't really have a choice. She was providing for us on her own essentially. She had some help from her parents, like my grandparents, but overall, like it was just her. And and then again, even after she married my dad, my stepdad, uh, the financial situation continued to be very, very, very rocky. Um, and I was starting to kind of pick up on that as a teenager, at kind of 15, 16, 17 years old. And I remember that just giving me so much anxiety, just seeing, just how scary things can actually be as an adult. That kind of informed this kind of other thing that was going on in my head of, regardless if you think this is the right decision or not, this is what was going on in my head. I was just thinking, if I sacrifice a portion of my childhood now, I can then live my complete adulthood so much better. That makes sense. I was seeing these people and I was observing, and I was seeing these people just kind of use the childhood card to kind of just like do whatever they want to do until they graduate high school at 18. And then they go off to college. And then in the 4 to 5 years that they spend at college, they then try to figure out what they want to do with their life. But then, they don't even really figure out what they want to do. So they just get the degree. That's kind of the least path of resistance that they can manage. Um, and then go get a job. And then they're like 27, 28, 29. And then they're starting to actually figure out what they want to do with their life. And then they don't actually get started with their life and start building towards a life that they want to live until they're like early 30s. But even by then, you got a kid, 2 kids, you got a wife, you got all these things. And that just doesn't make sense to me. Like, I rather sacrifice 17, 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, spend my hard 4 years grinding it out now so that by the time I hit 21, 22, 23, I could already start living the life that I want, or I could at least start actually building towards the life that I want. And so just all of those factors I just talked about just kind of combined together, and it just kind of informed this mindset of, I need to get out. I need to do something. I need to work extremely hard for a short amount of time. Just put my head down, work, 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 work. And then on the other side of that, I can live a more fulfilled adulthood for longer than everyone else. Instead of me living a quote unquote fulfilled life from 31 to 80, I can do that from 21, 22 to 80. And I just saw the trade off. I thought it was worth the trade off. And so that's what I spent the latter of my teenage years doing.
So you have talked about the glass ceiling in Mississippi and the limit on beliefs that most people have in terms of getting out. And you didn't have that. But I'm curious what limiting beliefs still stuck with you from there. I know, like, we've talked about in the past on a past episode about like finances, like personal finance in particular was something that you weren't worried about. You were just worried about making the money. Are there any other things as well? Or you can go into finances. Like, what are some things that you have limiting beliefs on because of where you're from?
I wouldn't necessarily classify them as limiting beliefs, but there are definitely things that I wish I would have been told or taught growing up, down in Mississippi. Finances were a big one. I could sit here and ramble about financial literacy forever. It just isn't a part of your childhood or the school curriculum at all. I was really just talking to a friend from Mississippi about this last night. They've also gone and moved out of the state and they're somewhere else and they're working a good job and doing, those things. And we talked about just how crazy it is that there's just no financial literacy back home. Just none. People don't talk about finances. Nobody shares their financial situation. It was very, very frowned upon to kind of talk about people's money. Like, definitely don't ask how much someone makes in a year. Definitely don't ask them what they do to make their money. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that, people our age, we're the people whose parents got wrecked in 2008. And 2008 in particular kind of informed how a lot of people behave around money. Everyone's financial situation was bad, but no one wanted to ask because when you ask about other people's financial situation, then you also have to talk about your own financial situation. And I don't think people wanted to talk about it, And so parents never talked about financial literacy because parents were never in a good financial situation. And then you combine that with it never being in the school curriculum at all, which is honestly so sad given the fact that Mississippi is the poorest state in the country. Like, the people who need the financial literacy the most have it the least. And so that was a big one, man. Like, coming here and moving across the country and starting a business and starting from scratch. I had no idea how to handle finances. I had no idea what to do with my money. I had no idea how much money I should keep versus how much goes out. I talked about in another episode. I made my first $100,000 before I even knew that I needed an LLC. I thought it was just kind of like an additional assurance, in case, oh, someone sues you, like they can't take your stuff. I didn't know like I needed that, so overall, yeah, financial literacy is a huge one. So, but I wouldn't necessarily classify that as a limiting belief. I would just classify that as a skill and a lesson that I wish someone would have taught me much earlier in life. I had no idea how much, like, oh, you should keep at least 10 to 20,000 in your business account at all times, or, keep cash reserves based on double your income for the month, or, whatever the rule that you want to put out is. Just didn't know anything about money. I just was focused on making money because I never had money. But once you made the money, had no idea what to do with it once I had it. Yeah, financial is probably the big one. Is probably the only one I can actually probably really think of right now. Everything else, truthfully, I would actually say shaped me in a positive way. Things like work ethic, that kind of blue collar mentality of, knowing what hard work actually looks like. I think that was probably a big thing, and something that I think is more important to take away from Mississippi is the fact that when I moved up here, what people up here considered hard work and what I had done personally back home and what I had seen, even my dad do growing up. Like, my dad works a very, very physically demanding blue collar job. And, he works a job that not only takes years off your life expectancy, but a handful of people die a year doing, like, that's hard work. The work up here that people classified hard work was just not in the same ballpark, in my opinion. And so in that case, like, it really set me up for success because I just had I had such a work ethic advantage on everyone else. But I'm kind of uh, going on a tangent there. The big thing in terms of limiting beliefs, though, again, not necessarily a limiting belief, but I really wish I would have had more financial literacy when I moved up here.
So to wrap up this whole backstory, villain arc, Batman journey, what was the lowest point, and then how did you get out of it? Let's start to we gave the whole backstory. Let's start to do the build up to where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that there was ever like one singular defining moment that just switched everything. It was kind of just like an amalgamation of several things over the years. I also, at one point in my life, I wasn't the best person. I definitely had my fair share of substance abuse and that sort of thing in high school. And just like overall was heading down not a great path. And I remember after I got clean, sober, whatever you want to call it, and just, started to be on the other side of that. I remember being on the other side of that and seeing what happens when you go down the wrong path in life, and knowing that I definitely don't need to go down that path. I need to stay on the straight and narrow and keep going that way. So, I mean, that was probably a big moment in my life.
I'm just gonna cut you off real quick. I don't think that we should just skip past that. I'm curious, like, what was that process to get out of that?
There's nothing more painful than seeing someone you deeply love not want to be near you anymore or be around you. During that not so great period of my life, not only just like my parents, but friends that I deeply, deeply valued, and friends who I thought I could count on didn't want to be around me anymore. They didn't want to associate with me. And it takes you a while to realize that's happening, but once you do, it's very painful. It's very painful. Not to mention that you're starting to see the repercussions of the lifestyle that you're living. So you're starting to see the negatives, but then again, if there's people in your life that you really, really love and they start disappearing because you're not a person that they need to be around, it sucks. Like, there's no other way of getting around it. And so I just saw the people in my life that I loved disappearing, and I knew that those were people that I couldn't lose, at least not at that point in my life. They were people that I needed to cling to in that moment. And so that kind of just like started that process, and I'm someone who once they make their mind up about something, it happens. I'm someone who moves very quickly on things. I'm not someone to really ponder something too deeply. Like, I have an idea, I think it's a good idea, I'm going to run with it and see what happens. So it's the same process for that as well. I realized that I need to change, and so I change. Next day, new person. I'm not perfect, but it kind of goes back to that mentality of you expect good things to happen because you trust the work ethic. So once I made up my mind that I knew I needed to make a change, the change itself wasn't very hard because I knew it needed to happen and I expected it to happen.
Is there a aspect of like fake it till you make it in there? Like, you just tell yourself that you're this changed person, and naturally by telling yourself that and the people around you, you become that person?
Yeah, I mean, fake it till you make it has been a huge part of my life. The amount of times that I have been not qualified, or I knew I was qualified to do something, but the people who I was talking to didn't think I was qualified or didn't know that I was qualified. And so, yeah, I've put myself in that position plenty of times, and this situation included. Um, but like, the problem with fake it till you make it is that a lot of people attempt it, but then can't back it up. I knew I could back it up. I never put myself in a position where I faked it and then also knew that I couldn't make it. Any situation I've ever been in where it was a fake it till you make it type thing, kind of over pitching yourself to a client or, you know, moving across the country, whatever the case may be. Like I knew that I could make it just given the chance. So similar situation, you know, I knew that I could make whatever change necessary to get back on the right path. And so next day, just start, put one foot in front of the other, and, again, trust the work ethic and it'll happen.
Is there a habit or an action that was the initial catalyst for the self-improvement journey?
Honestly, not really. I didn't even really get into self-improvement until like after I moved to Chicago. I actually looked at self-improvement as kind of woo-woo and kind of, dog, like you're thinking too much. You're over intellectualizing. Stop thinking so much and just work. I had a very kind of like brutalist mindset when it came to that. I'm not someone, I don't want to make this sound like I'm some like dumb, non-intellectual person that just like does things. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of people fall victim to over intellectualizing things and overthinking. And, the only way that you can actually find out if what you're thinking is right or not, and it's by doing. That's a lesson I learned from my dad early in life. My dad was not the person to ask you to do something that you didn't know how to do and then like show you how to do it. Him when I was 7 years old teaching me how to mow the lawn. My dad's version of teaching me how to mow the lawn was turning on the lawnmower, setting me on the seat and saying, figure it out. And he would just sit there and watch me, make sure I didn't kill myself. Because he was a staunch believer in you learn by doing. And so like, again, like he wasn't someone to sit there and like hold my hand and show me how to do it step by step. He said, you learn by doing. So yeah, self-improvement and that sort of thing was never something that I even really thought of until much later in life, until I was after quote unquote successful, really. Because once I got successful or saw some sort of success, that's when I started to think, okay, what can I be doing more? What can I be doing extra? How do I level up from here? That's when I started getting into self-improvement and I started giving it a chance and, reading the books, listening to the podcast. And I'm still, I enjoy self-improvement. Like we run a podcast about self-improvement. But I still am fairly cautious about what I consume, what I read, how far I get into it, because at the end of the day, it's about iterating, it's about doing, and that's what I hold above anything else. And that's how I kind of just lived my life always was I'm a doer, not a thinker. I'll do whatever I need to do. I'll collect the data to see where I went wrong, what went right, look back, look at the big picture, and then reiterate again.
Okay, so you moved to Chicago for a chance at a better life or an opportunity to build a business and have the career that you want. What was your position when you moved here, and how did that kind of affect the first few years that you were here?
Oh man, I moved here when I was broke. I had no money when I moved here. When I moved to Chicago, I need to go back to my old bank and get my old bank statements because I have a number in my head. I don't remember if it's I don't remember exactly the number, but I remember the night that I moved here. So I moved here like on a Tuesday, and Tuesday night I got a call, or like Tuesday afternoon I got a call from a friend here in Chicago, and they had asked if I had moved in yet. And I was like, I just did. Like I haven't even unpacked the boxes. And they're like, great, I have a job for you this weekend shooting with me. It's some bougie event that we have to cover. You need to wear your best suit. Gotta go, bye. Hangs up the phone. And I'm like so excited. Okay, like I got my first job. I'm good. I checked my bank account because I didn't own a suit. That's like, it hit me. I was excited and then it hit me. Crap, I don't own a suit. I'm from the South. You don't need a suit. I had like a blazer that, you wear to church on Easter Sunday, but that's about it. And I checked my bank account, and this is where I don't remember the exact number, but I remember it being under $200, if I'm remembering correctly. I want to say it was like $102 or something like that. It could be wrong, but I had less than, if we want to be extra conservative, I had less than $300 like to my name, period. No savings. I didn't even have a credit card at the time. Like, that money in my account was the only thing I had. I'd spent, you know, the work that I was doing, I was trying to build a photo video business in Mississippi. Like, the market just couldn't support it. That's ultimately why I left Mississippi, was that I couldn't make money in the business that I was trying to build. So the little money that I did save, I spent it all moving. I'd saved up like $2,000 or $3,000, but after, you know, security deposit, first month's rent, renting a U-Haul, driving across the country, this, that, and the other, that 2-3 grand goes quick. And yeah, I had no money. And so I remember having to call my grandmother, and I asked her, because I didn't want to freak out my mom. My mom was already like on edge about me moving. So I called my grandmother, and I was like, "Hey, can you Venmo me $200 so I can go to H&M and buy a suit? I promise I'll pay you back. I'm getting paid for this job." And I didn't even know how much I was going to get paid for this job. I was so just like new and naive to all of this. She Venmoed me $200. I went and bought my H&M suit that didn't fit, and it's kind of been off to the races ever since. That job led to other jobs. I actually worked and a quote unquote 9 to 5. I ended up working for the guy that you ended up working for, our friend Eric Floberg. I edited videos for him and stuff for a few months, and I just kind of like got on my feet. And then, once I got on my feet and, started to build a little bit of a clientele up here, and my business started doing well, I went full in on my own business and built it up. And then we started doing 6 figures in less than 2 years. I moved here in 21. And then I moved here in June of 21, worked for Eric for a few months, like 3 months or so, 4 months, went full in on my business. That first year, I think my business did like 25 in revenue, maybe 25,000. That next year, I did 76,000. So like my first like full fiscal year as a business owner, I think I did like 71, somewhere between 71 and 76. And then the year after that was when I started doing 6 figures a year in revenue. So yeah, I mean, like, it was just came here broke, and it was a do or die situation. One of my favorite quotes is "burn the boats." So just put myself in a position where there was no turning back, no plan B, and made it happen.
And then to make that situation even harder to, I guess, make it in, you got married within a year.
Yeah, that also made things so much more difficult, truthfully. I mean, I don't regret it. I love my wife dearly. But yeah, when I moved here, I was dating my now wife, Emma, and we did long distance for a year, essentially. And that was another like really driving factor was, I knew that here in the near future, I was going to be responsible for someone else. And for anyone who's married or dating or anything like that, if you have a person in your life that you really care about, you want to give them the best life possible. And I wanted to give that to Emma. I wanted to give a life that I thought that she deserved. And so, yeah, that's another just driving factor there of, I had to make this happen. If I'm going to marry this girl and, provide for her and all those things, like, I got to do it right. I'm not going to ask someone to join a sinking ship. So that definitely made things harder, but at the same time, it just kind of reinforced that do or die mentality of I got to make this happen.
So, from my perspective, I wasn't here the whole time that you were building your business and all of
Which
that.
is crazy that you missed out on such like formative years
Yeah.
being here.
So, from my perspective, though, it seems like you were in such a burn the boats, do or die situation that you almost didn't really have time to focus on anything other than building your business and making money. And I'm curious how that hindered your, I guess, balance in every other aspect of your life. And now being on the other side of it where you've built the business and now can take a breath and actually focus on the other parts of your life.
I kind of side with Hormozy on this. I don't think anyone ever actually has balance. I feel like balance is this term that people throw out and they don't even really know what it means or what it looks like. I don't know anyone who actually has real balance in their life. You're always going to be leaning one way or the other. I think the important thing is just to be strategic about what you're leaning into and how much you're leaning, and for how long you're leaning into that thing. So it was, obvious when I first moved here. I didn't have any money and I had to build up this business. So yeah, I had no balance. I had no personal life. I worked all day, every day for months on end. I would wake up at 6, 7 in the morning. I would, get to our studio here, or well, technically at the time we worked in a different studio. And yeah, I would, at the time when I was like working for Eric, I would get here like 6, 7 in the morning. I would edit for myself, work for myself, do whatever my business required me to do. And then I would work for Eric throughout the day. And then once, Eric left, I would finish working on whatever my business needed at the time. You can ask Emma, there were days on end, weeks on end, months on end where I would work 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day. So yeah, I had no balance, but also what else am I supposed to do in that situation? Like, am I supposed to make time to go and do this and do that? Like, no, like I got to pay bills. So it was a season of life. Worked really, really hard, and was a 90-10 split of work and personal, and that 10% was solely reserved for my wife. And then, yeah, build up the business. You can take a breath and you can kind of shore up that ratio a little bit. It's never perfect. It's never going to be perfect. And I feel like it's one of those things that you will drive yourself crazy trying to pursue. Like, there is no such thing as perfect work-life balance. Again, you just got to be strategic about which way you're leaning at what time. So I've recently been in a period of, I've spent the last few months in particular really leaning towards the personal life. I was talking to my wife about this the other day. I've never spent so much time on personal life and being home and being with, my wife and, just going and doing personal things. It is something hard it's a thing that's very hard to navigate and manage, especially when you spend an extended season leaning towards the work part of that ratio. But yeah, just like I never really beat myself up over it. It was never something that I held against myself because I knew it was necessary. I knew that I didn't really have a choice. So yeah, I feel like this like perfect work-life balance is kind of a fallacy in my opinion. You just got to be smart about which way you're leaning at the time.
And I think that we would be naive to say that you being on the other side of this super hard work season, that things are now just great. And I'm sure there's still moments where motivation slips or you feel off. What's your process for getting back on track?
Man, I had a full-on identity crisis at the beginning of the year. Chris Williamson talks about how there comes a time in business, and we actually talked about this in our episode about, saying no and stuff. There comes a point in business where you have to learn to start saying no, because saying yes to everything is hurting your business. And then you also have to transition from being the hard work guy to the idea guy. You're no longer the guy rowing the ship, you're the guy steering the ship. And that's a super painful transition to go through. And it invokes a full-on identity crisis because you've associated your entire past success with hard work and saying yes to everything and doing everything yourself. And now you're actually asked by your business to do the opposite of that. Now you're in a position where the best thing for your business might actually for you to go take a morning walk and actually think about what you need to be doing. And just even the thought of that, like, especially with me being such like a blue collar person, like it actively makes me physically cringe thinking about, oh, like the best thing for you to do is go take a walk. Like, can't stand it. Still don't like it, truthfully. Um, but, at the end of the day, at least for me, the process is taking a step back, trying to be as objective as possible, and look at the people that I'm affecting in life and the people that I'm impacting, the people that I'm responsible for, and ask, what's the best thing for them? What's the thing that I could be doing to give my wife the best life possible? You eventually swallow your pride, swallow your ego, and realize that, yeah, this transition sucks. It's not great, but it's necessary because on the other side of this, the business will be better for it. Our lives will be better for it. And ultimately, the people I'm responsible for, their lives will be better for it. So it's just taking a step back, looking at the big picture, and thinking about the people that you impact.
So with your personality and what you talked about earlier about expecting to do well in things and not being overly uh, expressive of celebration when good things happen, this might be difficult for you to do, but I'm curious what in all of this journey of getting to where you are now, what is the thing that you're most proud of?
I'm proud that I made it happen. I part of my identity crisis that I had at the beginning of 2025, going kind of through that transition of you're no longer the hard work guy, you're the idea guy, you got to say no to things. I kind of just like had a realization. I was here in the studio. I distinctly remember I was here in the studio by myself. No one had come in that day, because we share the studio with, a few other friends and stuff. I was here by myself. We had the little mini hoop right there on the door. I was warming up my lunch. I had been working for a few hours. I was warming up my lunch in the microwave, and I was just like shooting the ball into the mini hoop on the door. And it just kind of hit me that I'm in the second or third largest city in the country. I run a full-time business in the niche that I pursued when I was 16, 17 years old. I'm in my studio, not like my apartment, my studio that I co-own. I'm shooting mini hoop on the door. I don't have a fear of not paying my rent at the end of the month. And like I'm fine. I'm good. Like I'm doing the thing. I'm doing the thing that 16, 17-year-old Braxton wanted to do. And I just kind of had this realization of one, like, yeah, like we made it happen. Like I did it for 17-year-old Braxton. Like I did this for you. But then on the opposite side of that, or on the flip side of that, you also kind of have this identity crisis of nobody ever talks about what happens after you achieve your dreams. If you're someone who set somewhat realistic dreams in your life of, you want to get out of your hometown and you want to start a business and you want to be able to take care of your family, no one talks about what happens on the other side of you achieving that. People just talk about chasing your dreams. No one talks about what happens after you've achieved them. Um, and yeah, it's a whole lot of mental gymnastics to navigate. Um, but you kind of just like have to ground yourself and remember that this is an opportunity that so many people, including your younger self, would have begged to have. And this is the life that so many people want. And you gotta be grateful for that and continue on. That's why I'm a big proponent of what I would call outsourced purpose. We were talking about this the other day on our walk of what, the differences between what I would call self-sourced and outsourced purpose. I don't find purpose in building a business and doing all these things for myself. I find purpose in all of this because I get to take care of the people that I love. And so, yeah, it's difficult to navigate all of this, but you just stop again, take a step back, look at the big picture, ground yourself and recalibrate yourself into what gives you fulfillment. Not happiness, but actual joy and fulfillment. For me, that's taking care of the people I love. And yeah, So I think that's also probably something I'm really proud of myself for, is the ability to do that, because I do think a lot of people probably struggle with that, being able to stop, take a step back, and objectively look at the situation and be self-aware. Um, that's kind of really helped me get to where I am today.
What gives you any validity to talk about what we're talking about? Why should anyone listen to what you have to say?
Um, if there was ever to be an argument for me to have any sort of validity on self-improvement, on business, on life, anything at all, it wouldn't be because of my successes. It would be because of my failures. If you ever get the chance to talk, if there's, if you ever get the chance to talk to someone who has participated in my life in some way, I don't say this as a flex. I say this just because it's the truth. Like, I'm just trying to be as transparent as possible. Anyone you talk to has participated in any fair amount of portion of my life will tell you that I've lived a lot of life. And I think, just kind of objectively looking at my life, I've lived a lot of life for my age. And I've lived a lot more life than most people have by my age. And like, even mentally, I feel at least 10 years older, if not 15 years older than what I am currently, truthfully. Um, because of that, I've had a lot of experience in life, and I've been able to experience a lot of the failures that are just kind of par for the course. I've just been able to experience them a lot earlier than life than a lot of people do and will. Um, and because of that, I've been able to learn a lot of lessons early in life. So if there's any validity to anything I say, take it from the viewpoint of, not that I have become this Hormozy $100 million person who is ultra successful and is a guru and all this stuff. That's not, in my opinion, what would give me any sort of validity. It would be more so, I've had a lot of experience, particularly with failure, and I have learned a lot of the hard lessons that come along with life just in general, and I've been able to learn them from an early age. Um, and they kind of inform everything I do now. So, take it from my failures, not from my successes.
And on that topic, what are you currently failing at?
Dog, everything. um, I I wouldn't classify this as a failure. I don't love to classify my quote unquote failures as failures, as more so just kind of data gathering. I like to think that things happen for a reason, and I kind of just use my failures as good learning lessons to keep moving forward and to be better. But if you were to ask me something that I wish I could have done better, still like kind of keeping that mindset, I do wish that I would have, in the past few years, again, it's been kind of this just head down grind, make the business as best as it possibly can, scale, all those things. I do wish that at some point I would have stopped for a second and looked around and see how things were going from an internal perspective. What I mean by that is, don't get me wrong, I'm very, very, very blessed in life. I'm very fortunate in life. And, I did the thing that I wanted to do. At the same time, I definitely came to Chicago with a goal that was probably a bit too broad, really. And I just, as long as I was doing something remotely close to what I was dreaming of, that was good enough for me at the time. And so what that ended up doing is, I then started to make a lot of decisions based on kind of short-term reward instead of long-term fulfillment. So the way my business currently operates today, my business definitely still does a lot of things that I don't necessarily find very interesting or fulfilling, in a way, if that makes sense. And, I don't fault myself for what I did, especially when I moved here. I didn't have any money. I got married, all these things. Like, I made the right decisions. I'm not saying I made the wrong decisions. What I'm saying is that probably like a year and a half ago, I wish that I would have slowed down for a second. Because looking back at where I was a year ago, I definitely could have. I think I was still kind of having the scarcity mindset of, I still got to work, work, work. Like, this could disappear tomorrow, like that sort of thing. I wish I would have kind of just like stopped for a second and kind of reevaluated where I was and where I wanted to go. And instead, I just continued to put my head down and continue to work. And then, turn of the year, 2025, I realized that I've kind of built my business in a way that it's not 100% what I would like to be doing now. Again, I don't fault myself for any of the decisions I made. I think I still made the right decisions, but I do wish probably like a year and a half ago, I would have kind of just reevaluated things and kind of gone down a slightly different path than what I am currently. But at the same time, it is what it is. The best time to start anything was yesterday. The second best time is today. So you take it for what it is. And now, I'm already, I did that at the beginning of the year. And now I'm currently working on moving towards a different direction that I want to be going towards long term.
That's great. So to wrap this up, we'll do a little bit of rapid fire questions. First one being a book that had the most impact on you.
Okay, so I have kind of a different answer than what you're probably expecting. I definitely read growing up some self improvement books, like Gary Vee's book, Crushing It, which was definitely like impactful for me. But actually, the book that I would say probably had the most impact on me is a fictional series called Aragon. If you're not familiar with Aragon's a fiction kind of fantasy book, very similar in the same vein as like a Harry Potter or a Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings. Very kind of like grand scale, large novel. It's a 4-book series, I think, maybe a 5-book series. I can't remember exactly. I want to say 4-book series. But what I found super compelling about that series wasn't even necessarily the storytelling. And don't get me wrong, like I love the story, probably a top 5 story for me. What I found so interesting about those books was just how well they were put together. And then you look into the author, Christopher Paolini, and he started writing the first book when he was 15 years old. And I remember reading that and just being like awestruck. And that, that kind of fed into that whole thing we talked about earlier of, even people outside of my state of Mississippi, I was seeing these really incredible people doing things at young ages. And I was like, I can do that. Like, I don't understand why people tell me I can't do that. So he started writing the first book when he was 15, self-published it by the time he was 18. And Aragon went on to it's a best-selling series. It's one of the best-selling series of all time. There was eventually a movie adaptation, which was not very good, unfortunately. But I found it so fascinating that someone so young was able to make something so good because, Aragon is very similar in the fact to say like a Lord of the Rings in the sense that he built a whole language in that book. Like there's multiple languages that he made in that book. There's Elvish, there's Dwarvish, there's in the book there's a magic is actually practiced through the use of language. Like you have to use certain words to make things happen. And at the back of each book there was an actual dictionary of the languages that he made for those books. Like it's just mind-blowing that someone could make something so good at such a young age. That was something that I always just like kept in my head of like, no matter your age, it's, something that you can accomplish whatever you want to. That's something I dealt with early in life was the fact that I progressed pretty early in life. So that also means that I was in a lot of rooms where I was always the youngest person and people tend to just, I don't know if it's just human nature, but when people find out how young you are, they tend to not take you as serious. They tend to like kind of like little boy you a little bit. And it was just something that kind of always stuck with me is like, he did that at 15. Why can't I do something incredible as well?
A daily non-negotiable habit for you now.
Now that it's warming up, I don't keep this habit in the winter because Chicago winters are absolutely brutal. But my morning walk is so important for me. And it's my morning walk plus my morning reading. So I wake up in the morning, typically on a good day, I wake up at somewhere between 6 and 6:30. Sometimes I stay in a little bit later to 7:30. But either way, I wake up, I go by myself, and I just go for a walk. I usually walk somewhere between 25 to 45 minutes, I would say. It's not a super long walk, but 20 to 40 minutes, I would say, 25 to 45. Um, and I'm not going to sit here and act like, I raw dog that. Like, I definitely put in AirPods still, but I normally put on a podcast, someone that I really enjoy listening to, whether that be like a Chris Williamson or a John Deloney or someone like that. Something that's a bit more positive and informing. I'm not trying to listen to the news that early in the day. I try to stay, I know it sounds counterintuitive that I'm like listening to a podcast while I'm doing this, but I still like try to stay off my phone. My phone's still on D&D. I'm not looking at notifications. Like I literally pick up my phone, put it in my pocket, put my AirPods in and don't look at it. And I go for my morning walk. I do that. I come inside again, not looking at my phone as much as possible. And then I go through my morning reading. I read the Bible every morning. Then I go through a devotion. Then I go through whatever current book that I'm reading at the moment. So I'm currently reading through Dr. John Deloney's How to Build a Non-Anxious Life right now. So I go through all of my reading material for the morning. And then, I spend some time with my wife, make breakfast. I feel like I'm totally getting out of the whole habit thing, but that's just my habit is my morning routine. I'm not someone who's going to sit there and say that you need a cold plunge and do this and do that and, drink caffeine at 90 minutes past you wake up and like not all that hyper optimization bullcrap, but just a simple thing that can kind of mentally prime me for the day and setting me up for success. So waking up, going for my walk, going through my reading material, spend a little bit of time with my wife before she goes to work, and I'm set every day. I'm definitely the most dialed when I get to go through that entire routine without interruption.
A piece of advice for your younger self.
Truthfully, I don't know if I have anything to say to my younger self. And the reason why I say that is because, again, I'm someone who doesn't like to live a regretful life. I'm someone who doesn't like to look back at things and be like, man, like I wish I would have done that differently. I truly believe that things happen for a reason and everything works out the way that it's supposed to happen. And because of that, I wouldn't want to change anything about my younger self because I feel like I'm here and I'm the person that I am because of the things that I went through. So I would give very basic advice of, just don't stop and keep going. But I wouldn't be super interested in giving any sort of like particular advice because I feel like up until this point, I feel like I've made pretty good decisions on everything that I've done thus far, or the best that I could do given the information I had at the time.
And last question here. What are you currently most obsessed with on working on for yourself?
Like I said earlier, I'm reading through Dr. John Deloney's book, How to Build a Non-Anxious Life right now. And I think that's the thing that I'm working towards the most right now and the thing I'm most obsessed with. It's not necessarily a number, like a financial number. It's not a status. It's not a, this, that, and the other. Like I'm trying to just build towards a life that is as non-anxious as possible. Something that I've definitely had to deal with over the years is that I definitely think I had a little bit of like a stress addiction. When you put yourself through the things that I put myself through over the years, not having any money, moving across the country, building a business from scratch with no money, et cetera, et cetera. You kind of develop a little bit of a stress addiction and you kind of develop a little bit of a, like the alarm bells in your body are just always going off. And anytime you find a moment in your life where there's no reason for them to be going off and you almost set off alarm bells because the alarm bells are supposed to be going off and they're not, like you kind of get anxious because you're not anxious, if that makes sense. Right now I'm just kind of working towards building a life that I can navigate that and kind of put that away. Because, spoke a lot about confidence and expecting good things, and you expect good results and all that sort of stuff. But I don't want that to come across as I don't get anxious. Like, I'm actually probably the one of the most anxious people you would probably ever meet in your life. I expect good things, but I'm still going to stress about it to no end. That makes sense. Sounds a little counterintuitive, but yeah, I'm working towards building a life that I don't feel anxious about and I don't feel worried about, and I can wake up every day and feel okay. Not necessarily about myself, but about my standing in terms of safety and how the people around me also and how they feel safe. That's probably the thing that I'm most obsessed with.
Great. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. So if you appreciate Braxton's story and can relate in any way or just learn anything from his story, give this a like, share, subscribe, write a review, whatever you got to do. But also, give him some hate too. He can handle it. But yeah, that was Braxton's story, and I hope that you enjoyed, and we appreciate you listening.
So yeah,